Hello and welcome to the Heal with Helen podcast. I'm Helen Pengelly, and this is the fourth episode in my series Deconstructing ADHD. And I'm sharing my journey, also my discoveries following an ADHD diagnosis in February 2022 at the age of 58. And if you haven't listened to previous episodes, I've talked about the challenges I've had with my mental health, the difficulty getting support when, having a late diagnosis and people not believing you that you've been struggling all these years, and things that I've learned along the way about what is this thing that we call ADHD. You can't see because this is an audio thing, but I'm putting ADHD in air quotes. So at the end of the last episode, we were at about a year after my diagnosis, and my mental health had taken quite a nosedive, and I was probably at the lowest point I'd been in my life. And I couldn't, I was at a stage where I couldn't even see a future for myself. And and apologies, if anything I say is triggering, there will be references to suicidal ideation. And I'd also like to point out that anything that I share is based on my own experience, my own reading and research, and is not obviously a substitute for any medical advice. And if you're experiencing any of the issues that I talk about, then please, please, please go and seek professional help. I had a lot of support along the way, although it was difficult in some areas. In other areas, it was very good. My doctors are very good because I'm fortunate that they take mental health very seriously. And I've had no problems with them. And also getting access to work funding, that was fairly straightforward, to have a virtual assistant to support me to get going again with my business. And also the mental health helplines, 24 hours, brilliant people there. When, you wake up in the middle of the night or you can't sleep, being able to reach out and just talk to somebody, even if they haven't got any answers, just getting it out instead of sitting there mulling it over in my mind. And so I was on a retreat, and in mid-February 2023, sorry, and I was asleep, woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a tiny, tiny little voice inside my head, very, very quiet, very soft, and it said, "But Helen, you deserve to live." And that really feels like that was the turning point. I'd hit rock bottom. Financially, I was struggling. I didn't know how I was going to be paying my rent from one month to the next, but it also felt like, it was a real test of faith. If you're familiar with my podcast, you'll know that I'm a very spiritual person as well. And sometimes it feels like this is almost like our faith being tested. It's like, well, can you maintain this faith, this sense that something, it's going to work out? And in that moment, everything's okay. And I talked about this in previous episodes about gratitude for what I had, and just coming into the present moment and just saying, well, actually, in this moment, I'm okay, I'm safe, I've got a bed to sleep in, I've got food, and I paid my rent for this month. We'll worry about next month when that comes. And that's really what got me through. And talking about what you focus on expands. So I'm going to focus on the good things in my life. And that's not ignoring the problems. We're not going to talk about this sort of toxic positivity where, oh yeah, everything's okay, and it's not. We'd be realistic about our situation, but also at the same time, not everything is a disaster, not everything is bad. because our brains can go that way. They can end up being hijacked and saying, well, you know, this is terrible, this is awful, everything's going wrong. So at this point, I was also having physical symptoms as well. I had really bad eczema on my arms. It was itchy, it was bleeding. I'd never ever had eczema before in my life, and I'd been for this EWP, capability for work assessment, which left me even more traumatized than I was already. And the doctor there, he didn't even make any reference to the fact that I was scratching, itching, my arms were bleeding. And so when I went to see a pharmacist, because I called my doctor, they couldn't see me until after I'd come back from my retreat. So to get some, you know, some cream or whatever to deal with it. And then I went, after I came back, I went to the doctors. Oh, and in the meantime, I should say also, I did speak to the disability advisor at the Department of Work and Pensions, and she was absolutely lovely and helpful, and she gave me lots of advice where I could go for help and support. And one of those was to go to Scope, which is a disability charity. And also I got lots of help from the Citizens Advice, and they pointed me to where I could claim for a household support grant, which helped me with my energy bills. So there is support out there. So and that's one thing that I've learned over the last sort of couple of years or so, is that reaching out for support doesn't make you a failure. And probably one of the reasons I got to this point in my life is I hadn't been asking for support, because it would make me feel like a failure, thinking I should do this, I should be able to do this. So and it's about knowing where you can access this support. And some of the people that helped me, yeah, Citizen Advice, they were good. Also the social prescriber at my doctor's surgery, and the mental health social prescriber as well, and they can point you in directions. Also the there's Impact Workability, because I'm a registered carer, they can offer support and advice as well. I don't know whether that's a national thing or whether that's just in my area, but where you, as again, like I'm saying, what you focus on expands. So focus on where can I get support. Mind were good as well, mental health charity, and also carers support, because I have a son who has drug and alcohol problems and is on the autistic spectrum. So I've been going to them for 14 years for support. And because you don't have to do it all on your own. Anyway, so I went to the doctors, and when I walked in, the first thing she said when she saw my arms was, "Oh, that's all stress related." And she prescribed me some cream, and then within, I don't know how long, not long after that, it cleared up. And she also recommended antidepressants, because to help me, you know, with the emotional regulation and become regulated again. But at this point also, I was doing the annual EFT summit. Now, EFT, or emotional freedom technique, or tapping, works on the acupressure points. So it's, as it sounds, it's tapping your fingers on these points. And I first came across it maybe, I don't know, probably 10, 15, no, more than that, because it's before I moved, probably about 15, 16 years ago. And then I heard about it, didn't really do anything with it. I had some hypnotherapy, and I think he used some tapping with that to help with that was to help me with some emotional eating issues that I had. And I came across it again in 2020, for beginning of just before the first lockdown in about January, February, when I was at another low point in my life, and it really helped me. And I did actually then go and train to become a practitioner myself. And this summit comes around every year. And that was when I sort of discovered this summit in 2020. And I listened to all the talks, even if they weren't about issues that I was that were particularly relevant to me. Just tapping along, this really helped. And so I got this prescription for these antidepressants, and went to the pharmacy to collect them. And when I was walking home, there was just something, it was like a switch going on inside, you know, like another one, a bit like when I had that little voice in my head that actually I got these, I didn't read, and now I felt like I didn't need them. But what's interesting, and I was saying this to a friend, is that it just goes to show that I'd got to such a low point that I would even consider taking them, because I'm not, you know, I don't judge anybody who does take medication. You know, it's just generally a thing that's not for me. I had taken antidepressants back in 2008, but a friend of mine had said, be careful, because she'd had them become dependent on them. And I know, you know, that's a real problem, because I've known other people who've had that problem too. And I was aware that this was only going to be a temporary thing anyway. And also there was something about having them there that was like that safety net. Oh, they're there if I need them. And as I always do when I get any kind of medication, I read all the notes, the blurb that comes with it, all the warnings and possible side effects, which included depression and suicidal ideation. I'm thinking, well, aren't these supposed to be helping me with that? So it did make me wonder about them. But as I say, I don't judge anybody who does take them. So they sat on the shelf, and I continued with my EFT and started to feel a lot better. And also around this time, somebody recommended a book to me, which was called Patriarchy Stress Disorder by Dr. Valerie Rain. And I will put the link to that book in the description as well. And this was another one of those times, you know, when you read a book and it changes your life. And you've probably had those experiences too. And this book, as the title probably gives away, was talking about all the trauma really that's caused by our way of living, this sort of hustle culture, and for women, you know, being treated as second-class citizens, and how that trauma, it gets passed from one generation to another. And this is something that I was very much aware of in my own family, especially, you know, down the female line. And so there was also an interesting part in this book where the woman who wrote it had been working, she's a therapist and working with women mostly. And she said all the women who'd had a diagnosis of ADHD, obviously when they started working on their trauma, their symptoms went away. But oh, this is interesting. And you know how when you read a book, there are citations and references and things like that in the back. And I thought, and I made a note of these books, and then I went end up going down the rabbit hole and started reading more on trauma. I'd read a bit on trauma before. I read Mark Williams' book called It Didn't Start With You, which was all about how trauma gets passed on, even if we haven't experienced the traumatic event ourselves. If it's something that's happened to our parents or our grandparents and that hasn't been resolved, it gets passed on. So this book was very much, talking about the same kind of thing. So I wanted to know more about this, particularly with reference to the ADHD in inverted commas, because this is the first time I'd seen anything about the possibility that actually this doesn't have to be a lifelong thing. Even though, I've read a lot of Joe Dispenza and seen and heard some of the results that he'd had, not only on himself, but also on people he'd worked with, and he's done research, doing brain scans. And there's also another interview on my podcast with Dr. Peter Stapleton, who's done research on EFT. And also she did the brain scans for Dr. Joe Dispenza as well. So I'm thinking that there's something that we're not being told here, or perhaps, it's not that we're not being told, and I don't want to, I believe everybody's doing their best, and we only know what we know, what we've learned through our education, whether that's through formal education or self-education. So this, as I say, led me down a rabbit hole of reading more books about trauma. I read books by people like Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, and Janina Fisher, and Gabor Mate, who, interestingly enough, it was his book Scattered Minds that led me to getting the diagnosis of ADHD. Now, at this point, I want to say that diagnosis was very helpful. So, because it helps you to understand what's going on with these symptoms, and the symptoms themselves are very, very real. Let's not just dismiss that, because they are. What you call them is another thing, but the symptoms themselves are real. And and another book I read was called Naughty Boys by Dr. Sami Tamimi, who is a psychiatrist, and he was did a lot of research into the cultural aspects around ADHD, and this was obviously about boys, because in the past we do associate ADHD with naughty, hyperactive boys, and about the cultural expectations of their behaviour, and how much of this is that there is actually a problem here, or is it the society expecting these kids to behave in a certain way? And especially, since the Industrial Revolution and more formal education, kids being expected to sit still for 5-6 hours a day, when naturally our bodies are meant to move. We're not meant to sit still for long periods of time. So at any age, and it's and it's not good for us either. So when you start to sort of put all these pieces together, it was like, well, hold on a minute, what is this thing that we call ADHD? And even I was looking at other people saying, oh, well, I've got ADHD, and I'm thinking, well, how can you have ADHD when you're able to function? Okay, I'm not saying that you don't have problems and you don't have difficulties, because we all have those, but you've managed to earn enough money, hold down a job, or start a business successfully, but I've never managed to do any of those things. So then it was like, well, where is this ADHD in my brain? And you sit and you meditate and realize, well, there is no actual thing there. And I went on another retreat, which is led by one of the people leading it is actually a trauma expert, and we did a lot of work on, you know, childhood stuff and things like that that's still in the body. And I came away from that and I'm realizing I just felt so much better. And it's almost like, I'm not saying all my problems have gone away and I still don't have challenges. Of course I do, we all do, but they were lesser somehow. And there was this like, okay, this is something that I can heal. This is not a fixed, permanent thing, because nothing in our experience is fixed or permanent. Everything is constantly evolving and changing, which is why I realized, well, all these people that say they've got ADHD, we're all so different. So how can this actually be a thing? It's like, if you have a cold, we know we've got a cold because we get a runny nose. And that is the same for everybody across the board. And the same with other like illnesses. But in terms of the brain, our brain is shaped by our experiences and how we respond to those experiences. And of course, for everybody, that is unique. Even people having the same experience will respond to it in different ways. And Peter Levine talked about this in his book when there was, I'm paraphrasing here, so I might not be getting it exactly right, but it was something along the lines of that there was an accident and children were involved. Maybe their bus crashed or something like that. And so there was a lot of trauma there after the event. But there was one boy who went around helping people, and he didn't experience the same level of trauma symptoms as the others. He was able to sort of move past it and heal much more quickly. So, and also by moving, that trauma, it moves out the body. So he gave another example, like when, for example, a deer is being chased by a lion and it gets away, it manages to escape, and then it will shake after, because it releases that trauma, because trauma gets stored in the body. As Bessel van der Kolk talks about in his book, The Body Keeps a Score. Everything that's happened to us is imprinted in our body. And this was something, it was like a revelation to me, because all these trauma symptoms, like emotional dysregulation, executive functioning problems, all these things that I'd been struggling with, are also what they call symptoms of ADHD, and realizing actually this thing they're calling ADHD is just trauma. And then when you start talking to people, say, did you realize this? They say, but I haven't had any trauma in my life. Now, and again, this goes back, well, you might not have done, but you don't know what happened to your parents, your grandparents necessarily. And also some things that you don't call as like hugely traumatic, like being in a car crash or being abused, it might just be little things, like were you constantly criticized at school? And it's like a chicken and an egg situation here. They say, well, people with ADHD have received, I think, was it something like 20,000 more criticisms before the age of 12. I don't know where they got that figure from, but I think it was something along those lines. And but I'm thinking, is that because they have ADHD, or have they developed their symptoms because they received all that criticism? And I can relate that to my own experience of education. My primary school was great. There was a lot going on. I was stimulated. I was given work that stretched me. I didn't realise until much, much later that the work I was given was when I look back, I think, well, I was doing that at the age of 10, and because I just assumed everybody was doing it, and now looking back, they probably weren't, you know. But then when I went to secondary school, here's this little girl who is very creative and being pushed down this academic route. And when, you know, I talked in a previous episode about grieving, that's been a huge grieving process for me, because I even think about that now. I think, oh gosh, yes, oh, I'd love to have been an actress or a performer or a radio presenter or TV presenter or something like that, where I'm, I was never afraid of getting up on stage and speaking in public and things like that. Um, Although I was often ridiculed for the things I said. So again, that's had its effect. So if you internalize those experiences, of course, we've all experienced some level of trauma, and how we respond is as unique as we are. So I hope that has given you a little bit more insight and food for thought. And I'd really appreciate it as well if you'd share this with people, because there are lots of podcasts and stuff on YouTube about ADHD now. And it would be very easy, for the sake of popularity, to make episodes that, like there's one popular one called How to ADHD, which is like all the cliches about ADHD, because it get, like the clickbait stuff, just to get more likes and follows. But I don't see these people actually really delving into what it is. And I've read a few books on it, and it's all about coping strategies rather than, right, okay, let's heal. Let's look at what's caused these symptoms. Let's heal from them. Because I think we're reaching a critical mass now. Because it's nearly 3 years ago since I read Gabor Mate's book, Scattered Minds. That was June 2021. And at that point, then I started seeing stuff about ADHD everywhere. And there were things, saying, they reckoned, I think it was something like 4% of the population were neurodivergent. And now I'm seeing it's up to like 20-25%. So what is the critical mass? At what point are they going to say, oh, okay, everybody's unique, so there's no such thing as neurotypical and neurodivergent? There can't be. Okay, maybe some people have had more trauma than others. More people are more sensitive because of their environment, their upbringing, their experiences that shape their brain before the age of 7. But there is no such thing as neurotypical or neurodivergent, because we've got 8,000 million people living on the planet, and every single one of those is unique, just as I am, just as you are. And so, again, as I said earlier, if you are having challenges with your mental health, if you are experiencing these symptoms, yes, a diagnosis, because that is what the medical industry understands at the moment. So we have to go within those sort of labels, if we like, for now, because it can help us to get the support that we need. And I think that is important, that we heal ourselves, because otherwise it just gets passed on. If we don't heal our traumas, they just get passed on to the next generation. And if you will see that it says on here somewhere, trauma is not our fault, but healing is our responsibility. We can't change what's happened to us. That's in the past, but we can heal from that. And that makes the world a better place, because when we heal ourselves, we heal the world, because we have healthier relationships. We're able to be more productive. And I don't mean that in a kind of what do you call it, in an industrial world that we live in, that we're being productive is seen to be a good thing, and is measured by how much money we earn, these status symbols and things like that. I'm talking in productive, in leading a life that is of value to us, that we are living a meaningful life. And when our life has meaning, then we make a positive difference to the world, because we are inherently wired to heal and to change and to grow and to seek to become eventually enlightened and come back to our true nature. But it's just all this other stuff has got in the way. and so I'm going in a new direction myself. I was 60 last year in 2023. So I'm going to, it's time to reinvent myself and coming from a healed point of view. Because when I was trying to do all these things before, that's why I spent so much money and lost all my money eventually, because there was that part of me that wanted to heal and seeking answers, and actually that's all been part of the journey, part of the process. I'm not going to, there's no point in worrying about things that I've done, think, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that, because sometimes you realize, you do things and you realize, actually, that's not what I want, but you have to do it to realize that. So I do encourage you to delve deeper and look at what, healing is possible for you. Obviously, it depends on, all depends on our personal circumstances. And, 20 odd years ago, when I was bringing up 3 young sons, I couldn't have done what I'm doing today because they were my priority. I had to make sure I was earning enough money to support them and blah, blah, blah. It didn't help in the long run because I wasn't taking care of myself, but at least now, if I, with hindsight, I would think, oh, okay, now I know that my self-care is just as important as it is for anybody else's. So whatever you need for your self-care, that has to be a priority. Otherwise, you're no good to anybody else. And that is also part of the healing process when you start to take care of yourself. And if you have any questions, if I can support you in any way, of course, do reach out, and I will see you again in the next episode, where I'm going to share kind of what happened next, after all this learning, and about trauma, and how I put, some of these things into practice in my own life that have helped me, and some of the challenges that I still had as well, still face. I'm not saying that everything magically goes away. It's a journey, it's a long one, and it's one that you can't rush either. You have to, it's almost like you have to surrender to it. And that doesn't mean giving up and just it, but it means that you have to surrender and allow that healing to take place. And it's like if you cut yourself, you can't just say, oh right, I want that. That doesn't heal straight away, does it? You put a dressing on it to support the healing. That's thing to do, support your healing, but you can't make it heal any quicker than it will heal naturally. So so that's what I'm saying, is that it's a journey, and a lifelong journey, unless you become enlightened along the way, which I do wish for you. And but whatever your circumstances, and I've been through a lot in my life, I'm still here, and there is always, as long as you're breathing, there is hope. And that reminds, I'm actually going to read a poem, because I read this poem the other day, and it's by Mary Oliver, an American, she's American or Canadian poet, and she died not that long ago. And this poem is called Landscape. Isn't it plain, the sheets of moss, except that they have no tongues, could lecture all day if they wanted about spiritual patience? Isn't it clear the black oaks along the path are standing as though they were the most fragile of flowers? Every morning I walk like this around the pond, thinking, if the doors of my heart ever close, I am as good as dead. Every morning so far I'm alive, and now the crows break off from the rest of the darkness and burst up into the sky, as though all night they had thought of what they would like their lives to be and imagined their thick, strong wings. So we can imagine our strong, thick wings that are going to carry us on this journey. And there is something there that I've learned. It's like when you can let go and you can surrender, have faith, that is always there supporting you, even if you can't see it, even if you don't believe it. Okay, I will be back again on another episode of Deconstructing ADHD very soon. But in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this. Do share any insights or aha moments that you've had. And I will share links to some of the books that I've mentioned if you want to go and do your own research. And in the meantime, take care, go well, and lots of love.